A bed for the night. When I was about 12, my great-uncle John came from Ukraine to visit us in Canada. He had a lot of stories, but this was the one that stood out. In the late 1960s, John was travelling by train from his village to another to visit family. He had to change trains at one point and was dropped off at what amounted to a platform and a hut in the middle of nowhere. There was no one else at the station, and other than a dirt road that led off into the surrounding woods, there was nothing there. He waited for some time, but no train came. It was winter and getting colder and darker, and just about the time he started worrying about a place to stay and some food to eat, an old woman appeared out of the twilight. She asked if he was waiting for such and such a train, and when he said he was, she said it wouldn't be along until the following day. She asked if he needed a bed for the night and offered him a meal and room at her house, which she said was about an hour's walk from the station. Lodging with locals was more or less standard when travelling in this part of the USSR, and Great-Uncle John wasn't looking forward to a hungry night on a cold platform, so he was glad to accept her offer. He took his suitcase and they set off together down the dark road into the forest. It was more than an hour away, more like 2, and by the time they arrived at the woman's small 2-story house, John was tired and hungry. They went inside and the women lit some oil lamps and warmed some borscht for them. It was the first time John was able to see the woman clearly, and he was a bit startled to realise that the old woman was actually a man. Not wanting to pry and too tired to care, John finished his soup and asked where he would be sleeping. She led him up the stairs to a tiny room with a window that contained a single bed and nothing else. He thanked her, they said goodnight, and she closed the door. Then she locked it, leaving him in the dark. Somewhat creeped out by this, John called to her, but she didn't answer and he heard nothing else. Figuring he would deal with it in the morning and that she had probably done it by mistake, John set his suitcase down and laid on the bed, deciding to make the best of it and get some sleep. Before he could fall asleep though, he felt the urge to pee and got out of bed, hoping to find a chamber pot or something he could pee in. He got onto his hands and knees and began to feel under the bed in the darkness, thinking that's where the pot would be if there was one. Instead, he found a body. "Nope," Great-Uncle John said, and went right to the window to see if he could exit the room that way. It was nailed shut. He knew that if he remained in the room, he was probably a dead man, but if he broke the window and tried to get out that way, there was a good chance that the old woman, and who knows who else was there, would hear him and come into the room before he could get away. So he did the only thing he could do. He pulled the body from under the bed, heaved it onto the mattress and covered it with the blanket. Then he got under the bed and waited. Sure enough, about an hour later, he heard footsteps coming slowly up the stairs and then towards the room. The lock clicked and the knob turned slowly. In the gloom, John saw someone move towards the bed. Then he heard several terrific and sickening thuds. The person had bashed the body on the bed with a large crowbar, which they then dropped onto the floor, right in front of John. There was silence, then the person went out of the room and the door was shut again. The footsteps went down the stairs and then there was silence again. John moved out from under the bed, took the crowbar and was able to slowly pry the window open. He didn't say, but I imagine he was shitting bricks the entire time. When the window was up, he threw his suitcase out, then dove through himself, not caring what was below him, only worried about what was behind. He landed without too much injury and began to run into a field behind the house towards some lights in the far distance. It turned out to be a highway with some military and transport trucks on it, and John was able to get a ride to another village where he could catch a train. He didn't bother reporting what had happened to the authorities, since at that time in the USSR there was a distinct chance he would have been the one who got in trouble. He just thanked God he escaped and decided that the next time he travelled to visit relatives, he would take another way. Violin Hill. Around 2 years ago, I finally moved into a brand new house in a brand new building estate in Australia. I was one of the first to have a finished build in the area and was elated to finally gain independence. The first few weeks went by as normal, and during that time, I'd often take walks alone with the dog in the afternoons and roam the surrounding estate area. All the roads around us had been partially completed, and all the other properties were marked out, but no other houses were built, excluding one that was directly opposite mine. The house looked finished, but there was no driveway laid yet, and from what I could gather, no one lived there. To the left of my house, roughly a few 100 metres away, was a field with a huge hill in it. I later found out that the whole area was council property. Not only was no one allowed to build up there, but the whole hill was basically a no-go zone. For whatever reason, the council just didn't want people on it, so the whole area was surrounded by a huge chain link fence. The only other noticeable feature in the area was a small abandoned farmhouse with a shed a few kilometres down the road. I knew nothing about it and often went walking there with my dog, as it gave me something mild to explore among the vast nothingness I was living around. The entire place was dilapidated and completely inhabitable, but it was still interesting nonetheless. About a month or two after moving in, I awoke one morning to the sound of a violin. It sounded extremely distant and quite haunting. I actually enjoyed it and assumed that the neighbours opposite me had finally moved in. Excited that I finally had some people to talk to, I peeked out the curtain and saw the house opposite mine was still as vacant as it ever was. I got dressed, but by the time I managed to look outside, the violin had stopped. This happened roughly every second day for the next week. The violin would wake me up and then just disappear after about 45 seconds. I'd ignored it to the point where my curiosity simply got the better of me, and the next morning when I heard the violin playing again, I immediately jumped out of bed, threw on my dressing gown and shot out the front door. I scoured the early morning surroundings, and there, up on the hill, was a figure playing a violin. It was barely light, but the person looked very tall from the distance I was at, and as they were playing, was doing what could only be described as a waltz-type walk, spinning slowly around in a circle as they played. I took my eyes off the person and walked over to pick up the morning paper, and in the 10 seconds that took me, I heard the violin stop. When I looked up, I noticed the figure was no longer playing or dancing, but was now standing still and most likely looking in my direction. It was so dark I couldn't make out anymore, and we both just stood there for a half minute not moving before the creeps got the better of me and I went back inside. After that morning, things started happening. On my walks, I began to notice footprints on the surrounding properties that weren't made by me and that I'd never seen before, which I just assumed were from people walking up from the other housing areas down the road. I never awoke to the violin, but I swore I could hear someone walking on the street next to my bedroom window in the early mornings. However, I never saw anything. Other really general things as well, like random tools such as spades and rakes laying around the area, which I guessed were left there by construction crews, none of which I ever saw. I'd started getting calls at work that would immediately hang up on me, and I also stopped walking up to the abandoned farmhouse, as the experience with the violin player had me a little shaken. One night, as I was heading to bed, I turned off the television in the living room, and again I could hear the faint sound of a violin playing. However, it sounded more muffled and rehearsed. I froze, and a cold chill flowed through me instantaneously. Considering that it was about midnight and not the usual time I'd hear it playing, I went to the front window and peeked out to see that there was a light in the house opposite mine. It was clearly a candle, as I could see the dim light flicker in the empty window, and the music sounded like it was coming from an old record player. But in the 10 minutes I watched, I never saw any movement inside the house. I moved away from the window sufficiently freaked out, and after another 5 minutes, I heard the music abruptly stop. I peeked out again to notice the light was now out. I never saw anyone. I began to become unsettled in the house and would often invite friends over to hang out until late, but of course nothing would ever happen when someone else was with me. I never bothered to tell any of my friends, as without evidence, I figured they'd just give me shit about it and I'd just become more agitated. But nothing compared to what happened next. In my living area, the desk sits right next to a small window which looks out to the fence surrounding my property. The steel fence is literally an arm's length from the house and about 6 feet tall, so I always figured that, unlike most of the other windows, I'd never need to cover this one with a sheet or blanket because no one could ever see in. I usually had headphones on when I played, and I always had the lights off, for no other reason than I prefer to play games in the dark. One night when I was gaming, I got up and walked into the dark kitchen and got a beer out of the fridge. It was dead silent, excluding the faint sound coming out of my headphones. As I closed the fridge and turned around to face the desk, I saw directly out the window 2 very, very faint lights. I didn't even catch on and immediately started walking back to the desk, fixated on the small glowing balls, and it wasn't until I had my nose almost pressed against the glass that I realised the 2 lights weren't lights at all. They were eyes. A set of eyes sitting just above the fence line, staring wide open at me. They didn't blink. They didn't move. My entire body locked up. All I could do was simply stare back as my brain was still comprehending that there was an actual person looking at me in the scariest way I could possibly ever imagine. I don't know what happened. Either my head kicked into gear or my muscles loosened, but my body automatically collapsed and I fell to the floor, scurrying to hide against the wall, away from the window. I could hear my heart beating through the carpet like a drum as I tried to lay as flat as possible, and as my mind was still processing the sheer severity of the situation, a violin started playing. That fucking violin and the haunting tune it always emitted started up, except this time it was directly outside my window and much louder than I'd ever heard it before. The lights were still off and I wanted to get up to turn off the PC screen so I couldn't be seen, but my whole body just wasn't ready to cooperate. Not only was the sound of the instrument extraordinarily loud, but it sounded like it was being played with frustration, notes being missed frequently and the strings screeching. The pace of it was getting faster and faster, and by this time my dog, Jeb, out in the backyard, had picked up on the situation and, registering an unfamiliar sound, gave one solitary, deep bark. The violin instantly stopped, and the house was finally dead silent, excluding my headphones, which I could hear quietly working away. I was still frozen to the carpet, and it wasn't until Jeb gave a second menacing bark that I heard the figure outside the window start to walk away in the direction of my yard. Once that first footstep hit the ground, I instantly thought of the welfare of my best mate, and finally my head connected with my extremities and my entire body kicked into overdrive. I leapt from the ground and slid across the laminated floor to the back door where Jeb was standing, staring into the backyard. I ducked to keep low and quietly unlocked and slid open the door. Usually doing so would notify Jeb that he was allowed inside, but when the door opened up, he didn't move an inch and was completely fixated on the pitch-black backyard. Everything told me not to go outside, but there was no chance I was letting anything happen to my dog, and I moved out onto the alfresco, moved behind Jeb, put my hand under his collar, and attempted to back him towards the house. Jeb is a pure Labrador and weighs like a sack of sand, so when he doesn't want to move, it takes a sheer force to pull him in the direction you want him to go, and right now, Jeb wasn't going anywhere. I yanked at his scruff, and as I did, he emitted a bark like I'd never heard before, a deep, bellowing, fuck you right off sound that elevated my nerves to an all-time high. We both just stood there, waiting for some form of reply, and I couldn't remember how long we both just froze there, but eventually I heard footsteps from around the side of the house begin to walk away. But not a simple walk, almost like whoever was doing it was slowly dancing in a circle, the footsteps keeping to a beat as they drifted away from the house into the distance. Once I couldn't hear anything, Jeb licked his lips, gave me a look and wandered back inside. I followed, locked the door behind me and spent the night reverting to my childlike self, hiding under my bed covers with my dog. I didn't sleep a wink. That was the last time I ever saw or heard the violin player. The following morning, when the sun finally came up, I called into work sick and called the police. They scoured the lot next to mine and found footprints in the dirt. However, there were so many there that it was impossible to tell whose were whose. The only description I could give to the officer was his height. He would have had to have been over 6 feet to stare over that fence at me, but they explained that he could have been standing on something or on his toes. They also told me that they'd never received a report of anyone playing a violin in the area, or anyone being in the fenced-off hill either. I essentially looked like an insane person, but the officers were very nice about the whole thing, and offered to patrol the area for the next few nights, which helped put my mind at ease. Nothing else has happened since then. Over the next year or two, people finally started moving in, and I tell them all the story about the figure I saw, some of which still use to keep their children in line, which I find funny. One guy nicknamed the council lot Violin Hill, and the name has stuck around our street since then. I even spent a period of time scouring the depths of the internet for that violin tune I kept hearing, but I could never find it. There were a few classical pieces that seemed reminiscent, but I've since thought that whatever tune was played must have been self-composed, which creeps me out even more. I'm still in the house. I still tell people the story, and I haven't changed my routine one bit, which has really helped me to block out the fear of the experience. I game with the blinds closed now. In the hills, no one can hear you cry. This is actually my stepmom's and her best friend's story. I have my own, but I'm so hesitant to drag some of them up, I'm hoping telling someone else's will open me to it a little more. My stepmom didn't like us much, but she told my sister, 3 years older, and I this experience growing up to scare us out of being stupid. It was my family's stranger danger story. My stepmom, we're going to call her Macy, grew up as a kind of a privileged teen in the 1970s, and her mum had moved their family over there, the States, from England when she was about 9. She went to a pretty nice high school in a really nice town. There she made friends with a girl, Lily, who didn't exactly run with Macy's type of crowd, popular, stereotypical, etc. They really hit it off, and Lily would take Macy out to do her type of stuff, hiking, fishing, sailing. There's even a hilarious set of pictures of them camping. My stepmom has raccoon eyes and looks like she hates everything. Anyways, because of Lily's influence, the two of them would do stuff like that a good amount. One Sunday, they decided to go hiking in some hills about an hour away. Macy put on what I'm sure were her extremely expensive hiking shoes, and the two of them drove off to the hiking trails. Lily parked in this big clearing with makeshift parking spots, like a piece of wood marking the head of a space, but there were no other cars there. This was only important in hindsight. They started hiking up the hill, off the path because Lily fancied herself as something of a badass. The hike was nothing extraordinary. If you asked my stepmom, she would just lament for 15 minutes how sticky and buggy it was. Anyways, they reached the top of the hill and my stepmom was done. The polished, pampered side of her was coming out, and she groaned until Lily begrudgingly said, okay. They would rest and then walk down again, slower. They had been heading down the hill for maybe 10 minutes when Macy started bitching again. Lily conceded to walking down the side of the road instead of the rough hiking trail. So there they are, probably looking like a couple of tools geared up for hiking and walking down a crappy road, and after not even 5 minutes, a truck pulled up next to them. It was red and rusty, and just generally looked like a clunker. The guy driving rolled down the window, and the girls looked in through the passenger side window. He had a big beard, a baseball cap pulled down, and long brown hair. He greeted them and even smiled through his beard, asking if they needed a ride. Macy described him as charming and even cute. Lily still says the moment he greeted them, her hackles went up. Despite her better judgment, my stepmom convinced her to get in the truck. It must have only been a 10-minute drive down to the car, tops. The two girls opened the passenger's door to this rusty old thing, and the guy directed them behind the seat to get into the back. They settled in and the truck started rumbling forwards. Lily always said that this was the point it hit her, what a mistake they had just made. The back seat was clean enough, but there was a rope on the floor behind the driver's seat and 4 boxes of saran wrap half hanging out from under the passenger seat. It seemed creepy and weird, but Lily didn't want to freak my stepmom out, so she just kept her mouth shut. After 10 minutes, the woods didn't look any clearer, and they hadn't seen another car the whole time. Lily asked how long he thought it would be. He said he was taking a different route down the hill and had to stop somewhere to get something first. That was it. The girls were 16, 17, and Lily didn't want to press the issue. She was scared. She can remember his hair because she was sitting behind him. He looked like a woodsy guy, but his hair was super tangled and dirty. She noticed crusted mud on his collar and tried to find something identifiable about him, but just got scared the more she picked up on little details. He was young-ish, strong-looking, and had at least 1 foot on both of them, so they didn't ask any more questions, and he didn't offer any information, and they drove on. Several minutes after that, they reached a tiny shack/log cabin looking place right there in the clearing of trees. There was an old stump where someone had been chopping wood and a huge axe stuck into the log. Lily was definitely on red alert now. The guy turned off the truck and slipped out of it, saying, "I'll be right back, don't get out," and he disappeared into the house. Lily tried to talk to my stepmom about how she was incredibly uncomfortable, but she mostly just dismissed it. Lily started begging, increasingly freaked out, and finally put her foot down, demanding Macy exited the truck with her. So they got out and walked around the front of the vehicle. The house was about 50 yards in front of them. Why this guy would have left 2 young girls in the truck alone while going into the house is beyond me. And they wandered around, looking at it hesitantly. If this guy was decent and just trying to give them a ride, it would be super rude to just run off, right? My stepmom had this strict upbringing when it came to manners and a public persona, and she saw it as an issue of this nature, so she actually started to head back to the truck, opening the front door to climb in behind the driver's seat. Lily was pissed off and followed her to yell some more. On the driver's side floor, half hidden under the seat, there was a big hatchet. It had dried red and brown stains covering the blade and stuck to the floor under it. Lily understandably lost her shit, and seeing it, my stepmom started getting hysterical. They decided that leaving was by far their best option at this point, and just booked it off the side of the property into the trees. They bumbled around in the trees for a little while until Lily was fairly confident they were on their way back down the hill. My stepmom cried all the way down. Lily felt bad about it, but was also completely freaked out that he would hear it and kept trying to calm her down. When they finally got back down to the bottom and saw the old wooden fence that surrounded the original parking area, they were relieved. But as they got closer, they saw it. The truck. It was parked on the other side of the gravelly makeshift lot, just sitting there facing the other way innocently. They couldn't see if anyone was in it, and of course Macy wanted to run for the car, but Lily was super hesitant. She managed to calm my stepmom down, saying she wanted to wait before running out into the open to see what was out there. Remember, this is the 70s, no cell phones. There was no ranger station or anyone around. The parking lot was big and empty and open, and who knows what would have happened if they decided to stroll across it. Thankfully, Lily convinced my stepmom to chill, and the two of them hunkered down against a big tree, hidden by bushes and other trees, and waited it out for what seemed to be a couple of hours when dark started to fall. All the animals started coming out and making noises, and my stepmom, predictably, started getting antsy about this and bothering Lily, who was tired and moments away from giving in. She was just planning their dash to the car when they heard a clunk. Across the twilight-lit lot, they watched as one of the back doors of their car swung open, and the bearded guy slid his way out of the back seat. He got out, shut the door, looked around at the surrounding woods for several moments, and then walked back to his truck. The truck lumbered past their car and out of sight. Several minutes after watching him drive away, they sprinted to their car as fast as they could, jumped in and peeled out before they had even shut the doors. Vermilion Lake. During the midsummer, usually around the middle of July, me and a couple of my good friends, who I have mentioned as Kevin, Tommy and Ryan, all the way through my childhood, always made time to go up to my one friend's family cabin, way up north in the forest of Minnesota, the cabin located on Vermilion Lake. Throughout all of our young years, we would always go, for sure accompanied by my friend's dad, Kevin's dad, who owned the cabin, and sometimes a few of our dads as well. Once we were juniors in high school, we felt mature and old enough to go to the cabin on our own, finally, without Kevin's dad or any other adult supervision that may have accompanied us. I would like to mention a little information in regards to my friend's cabin to help you picture the scenario. My friend's cabin is very remote and very little based upon a very large-sized island. Other cabins were on the island, but the next one closest to us was a solid half-mile away at least, which you could get to by taking a man-made path around the island. And I want to mention that to get to my friend's cabin, you had to park on a gravel road on the opposite side of the island, as his cabin was on an island, and take his boat across the lake about a half-mile to reach the cabin. The lake is huge. My mind always has a tendency to run around when sleeping there at night throughout all of my years, for it was all one level with only 2 bedrooms next to one another, a kitchen, living room connected, and a bathroom in the back of the cabin. And where you slept in the cabin was there always at least one window in each room, with no curtain to it at all. So it was very easy to see outside to the woods and lake, and this is where my mind would run, as I always thought something or someone was peering in. Of course, nobody ever was. I had been to this cabin a dozen times throughout my lifespan, and nothing had ever happened. And the older I got, the easier it was to sleep. We usually would stay a week's worth or 4 or 5 nights. On the third night during this trip, when we were there on our own, finally, we had set up a campfire and had been drinking beer all night. I don't condone underage drinking, by the way. We just happened to sneak some, being the rebels we were. We went out to the dock to gaze up at the magnificence of the stars and enjoy our buzz when all of a sudden we heard something out at the water that sounded like a fish jumping out to catch a bug. We quickly looked out at the lake with curiosity, wondering where the splash came from, having our poles ready 24/7. Thankfully, the moon was out that night, which helped light up the lake. Otherwise, it would be dark as black with there being no city lights for miles upon miles, and we would not have been able to see anything on the lake. My one friend, Ryan, began to point out, saying, what the hell is that? After looking closely and finally spotting what he was pointing at, all I can describe it simply looked like a head out in the middle of the lake, just floating about, staring at us directly. It was about 3/4 worth of a football field length out in the lake from the dock. There is no question that I could see its features. It had long black hair and very pale skin, like a face, but couldn't make out the eyes, the mouth, nose, or chin, as if it was just a blob of pale skin with long black hair over it. I'll never forget the feeling that came over me. The hairs on my legs, neck, arm all stood up, and I was paralysed on the inside, ready to leave that moment. But we told ourselves it was just a loon, as these birds are very popular night drifters on the lake and do their hunting late, and also have black with white colours on their coats and hunt by diving deep into the water, holding their breath up to minutes sometimes. So it was possible that a loon all of a sudden popped up in the water after hunting a bit, or at least we tried to talk ourselves into that scenario. All of us having the creeps and noticing it wasn't moving one bit, just treading water in its same place, we went back to our campfire, lit it even brighter, and headed inside to drink more. I would like to mention that there was a staircase outside my friend's cabin, about 8 stairs in length, down to the bottom where the fire pit was and the dog. We soon forgot about the head with the help of the beer until I had to use the bathroom really bad and the one inside was preoccupied. I just went outside to do my business, since we were in the great outdoors. When I had been taking a pee and glancing out at the beautiful moonlit lake, I noticed that the black circle object was still there, but about 30 yards closer now, still looking as if it was staring right at me. I could easily see the nose on this thing's face. Again, it was very pale, like it hadn't seen the sun for years. A very, very uneasy feeling came over me, and I immediately went inside, told my other friends to come look quick, keeping my eyes glued to it at the door to the cabin. We came outside to see it still there, looking at us as if this head was cocked up at us with its chin in the air. Nobody dared to go down to the dock anymore, and we immediately went back inside, ruling out that it probably wasn't a loon, because a loon wouldn't have tread the water in the same spot. Eventually the current would have drifted it somewhere else in a rocking manner. For a loon to stay in the same spot for almost an hour or two made no sense to any of us. This head-like object was stiff as a board and not moving a single muscle, just staring up at us from the deck instead. There was no ripple effect at all in the lake from the object. We said it was just a log and went back in. I could tell everyone else felt uneasy too. A few hours would pass. It was super late into the night at this point. I knew we needed sleep. Being my curious self, I looked back outside once more, and the black object had completely vanished. I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, thinking the log must have floated off or just hit shore somewhere. As we slept with the windows open that night, there was no AC in this cabin and we had to open them or we would fry in his cabin with it being in the middle of the summer. Me and my other buddy, Tommy, slept in the living room while my 2 other friends slept in the 2 separate bedrooms with their doors open. Not being able to sleep, but keeping my eyes peeled shut, I began to hear someone walking around at the bottom of the stairs to the cabin, around the campfire and at the bottom of the stairs. I thought I was about to shit bricks. No question what or who I heard down there was on the dock now, pacing back and forth as it made the sound of a boot clicking on the wood. It was as if they weren't sure what to do with themselves, and it lasted for about 3 minutes. Wanting to whisper to my buddy, but frozen in fear, I just kept my eyes shut and ears on full alert. The footsteps sounded like they took 2 steps up the deck stairs all of a sudden, but then turned around and sounded like they were sprinting down the man-made path. After it sounded like the steps were long gone and a couple minutes had passed, I woke up Tommy, asking if he had heard the steps, both of us sitting up. I was startled that my friend, Ryan, walked out of his room and said we needed to leave a minute after these steps vanished. He must have heard us talking, so felt he could come out as well, but either way he was waking us up regardless. Something was very disturbing about his expression, and I asked him why. He woke up my other friend, Kevin, in the other room and said, "Let's go, get to the boat, it's time to go." Asking him, "What? What? Ryan, what the hell is wrong with you?" He explained to us quickly while grabbing his stuff, and I will never forget what he explained, as won't my other friends. He said when he was turning sides on his bed to get more comfortable, he saw someone peeking in at the top right corner of his window, and it quickly shifted out of his view. He said all he saw was one eye, ghostly white skin and black hair, long down the window. Again, another thing I would like to add, when we look back at what he experienced, it chills us to the bone, realising that since this face was in the top right corner of the window in my friend's room that he was sleeping in, this thing either was damn near 8 feet tall, standing on something like bricks trying to peek in, or was floating. Ryan then continued to say, "Let's fucking go," very seriously. Absolutely disturbed the fuck out of my mind and feeling like I was going to be sick, and then telling them what my friend and I heard in the living room, we all agreed and packed up our stuff and booked it, not cleaning the cabin or anything. We always had to clean the cabin before leaving. We locked up, and as we headed down the stairs, we saw bare footprints in the dirt heading off into the path and all around the cabin. We picked up our step, getting to the boat, not knowing what was watching us or around us, threw our stuff in the boat, untied it and sped off. I didn't even think about the head in the water anymore, or to look in the water, thank God. My eyes were just glued to the island, trying to spot anything moving, but I saw nothing. When we had finally gotten our stuff back in the car and boat tied up, we hopped into the car and took off. We'd been driving out about 10 miles, and out of the blue, Ryan, who said he saw the person outside his windows, all of a sudden broke down in the car, sobbing, saying, "What was it, guys? Oh, fuck. What did I see?" We called to tell our parents what had happened on the way back, and that Ryan was freaking out, and they told us to just get home safely and quickly. It was late, about 4 or 5 in the morning, but no one slept, and it was a very quiet ride home. My friend's dad, who owns the cabin, went up that following weekend and said he experienced nothing while there, but did mention bare footprints were still lingering about, which he thought odd because someone was walking around his property, which bugged him badly. Whatever my one friend saw in the window really hit him hard. After his breakdown, he had trouble sleeping multiple nights and ended up having to seek help for a couple of weeks and hop onto some sleeping medicine. As time went on, he ended up being fine, but isn't too comfortable sleeping next to a window without a curtain. To this day, I cannot explain what happened and why it seemed to happen to us, and cannot explain what I saw in the lake and what Ryan specifically saw. Nothing has ever happened at that cabin since that night, so we're told from my friend's dad who owns it, which I believe him. I personally have never decided to go back to the cabin, which really makes me sad because I had great childhood memories there. Tommy and Kevin both have gone back and have been fine, but Ryan refuses to go back, and I'm with him. A lot of people have cabins on this island, so it could have been a prank in the making that had been busted when Ryan saw the person at the window, or the person probably wanting to do something worse. I will never be able to explain what was floating in the lake, but the fact that this incident, along with the bare feet and someone looking in at Ryan at night, all happened in the same night seems like more than a coincidence.